Hey folks, Andy here. Thanks for joining me. Right, funny thing about us guitar players is how many of us still love valve amps or tube amps, depending on where you live in the world. You know, despite the fact that there are so many alternatives that are smaller and lighter and cheaper and hugely more flexible, there's still something about the way a valve amp overloads, distorts and drives the speakers that makes everything that we play seem just a bit more exciting, a bit larger than life. And so we put up with them. One of the main things that we have to put up with is how loud they can get. Now, back in the days of the early tube amps, they were made to be as loud as possible, as clean as possible. The output stage was the first thing that would overload, and you would turn the amp up until a point before it started distorting, and that was as loud as it feasibly would go. And then some youth turned everything up way past the red line, and the sound of rock music was born. The problem with those iconic old amps, things like the AC30s and the Plexis of the world, is that how they sound is so firmly tied to how loud they are. You turn the amp up and it gets thicker and richer, it gets more harmonic content, it gets crunchier, it sustains better, and it gets louder. And back in the day that was fine, because the guitar amp had to carry the weight of amplification for the whole room that you were playing out in. PAs didn't carry guitar signal in those days. So you would turn your amp up, and you know what, when it wasn't enough, you get another amp and stand it next to it, or you get a bigger amp. And so we went from 15 to 30 to 50 to 100, for goodness sake, to 200 watt amplifiers just to try and fill a hall. That's not how we work today. Today, we tend to want to be able to get the sound that we need at a much lower level so we can play on quiet or silent stages when we're recording at home, when we're practicing, that sort of thing. Now, the early amps, you would plug your guitar into the front of the amp, you'd hit a gain stage, which would make the signal bigger, you'd maybe hit another gain stage, and then you'd have a volume control that would affect how much of that was fed through to the power amp to be powered up to push air out into the room via the speakers. In around about the mid-70s, master volumes started to appear on amps, and the way those amps work is that you would have cascading gain stages in the preamp, and you would put a control so you could affect how much you were overloading the preamp tubes and then turn it up or down before it went out into the power amp. This gave us the opportunity to kind of decouple how loud the amp was going to play from the sound of it. Now, not all master volumes are born equal. Some of them, like the one on the Victory Sheriff, which is a modern post-phase invert master volume, are super smooth. You can go from full bore open down to whisper quiet in like a smooth curve. The Undertake pre-phase inverter master volume on my Marshall sounds absolutely glorious when it's turned up past 3 or 4. Start getting down to 1.5, 2, and there's a point where it sort of switches and it suddenly goes from sounding like a quiet Marshall to sounding like a swarm of wasps in a tin can, and then it cuts out. It's like a switch. It's absolutely horrible. You cannot play that amp whisper quiet. Whatever you do with it, it sounds rubbish, 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 and then it punches and becomes glorious. But when it kicks in, it's a bit of a shock to the system, even on the 50 watt version. Now, there's nothing quite like the sound of an output stage that's really motoring, where you're getting the saturation in the transformer and in the power tube. That's like the gold standard of that sort of guitar tone. But certainly, preamp drive is very satisfactory and actually became pretty much the sound of rock and metal music from probably the sort of 80s onwards to this day. Right. If we need to choose an amp, what do we need to look for? One of the headline features is going to be the power rating of the amp. And as a general rule, the bigger the power number, the louder the amp's going to be. Just to get an idea of how that works, because it's not totally intuitive if you're not used to this stuff. If you have, let's say, a classic 100 watt Marshall Plexi, that amp is going to be absolutely stupidly loud. If you've got a 50 watt version of the exact same amp, it's going to be around about 80% as loud. A 10 watt version is going to be about half as loud as the 100 watt, and the 1 watt is going to be around about half as loud as the 10 watt version. If you think about it, that means that your 1 watt practice amp is still a quarter as loud as that paint peeling 100 watt Plexi. So given that, what's a decent sort of number to look for? A 1 watt amp is going to be far too loud, turned up to 10, to sit and practice with at home with someone else around. It just doesn't work. But a decent master volume where you can turn it down, absolutely sweet, and a great recording amp. I've got a 5 watter which has got a good master volume. I can turn it down, practice whisper quiet at home. I've taken it into a studio, sat it down next to a drummer. I can hear it, but it's not got enough headroom to give any ability to play dynamically, so it doesn't really work for that. 20-watt amp tends to have enough poke to be heard on stage. It'll turn down enough for practice at home. It sounds great for recording. 50-watt amp, probably the favourite of the amps I've got. The Marshall sitting behind me there, absolutely brilliant, but doesn't turn down too well. But once you get past a certain point, especially with a few of the little things that we can do to help tame it, that's a really nice spot. And with some modern technology, you can do a lot with a big bore amp. Now, some amp manufacturers give us some extra ways to take control of the level of our amp. It's not uncommon to find a switch marked high-low, or maybe pento-triode. And these will generally switch down some of the voltages in the amp so that you get less headroom, so you get more sag and more distortion at a lower level. Or they might change the way some of the tubes are used. Now, some amps take this a step further with power scaling or variable power. And I'm going to put a link below to a website that's got a lot of detail on this. It can get quite complicated quite quickly, but very useful if you're looking for some very good sounding, but maybe intrusive and extreme ways to tame your amp. Some amps, like my THD bivalve over there, you can change the output tubes. You may also find that you've got a built-in load, a Mavectory Sheriff that drops the output power to 0.3 of a watt. Some amps take this to a whole new level. Consider something like the Sir PT15IR. That has a built-in reactive load. You can drop the entire output of the power stage of that amp, get a line level signal, feed it to an onboard IR loader, and then take an output from that. The amp can be totally silent with the power amp turned up all the way to feed into a PA, a mixer, something like that. So if your amp doesn't have a built-in load, you can add an attenuator after the amplifier. I've got behind me there a THD hot plate. Now that's a piece of technology from the 80s or 90s. It's a resistive load which is kind of scowled on a little bit these days. It's not as good, let's be perfectly honest, as a more modern reactive load. It doesn't appear to the amp quite as realistic a view as a speaker as a reactive load does. But just used on a low setting, not 4 dB off, it means that I can get an amp like my Marshall to the point where it actually sounds like an amplifier without upsetting the sound engineer too much, so that works for me. So the next level of attenuator is a reamper, and the one that springs to mind here is the Fryette power station. It's got a reactive load built in, it drops the amp signal all the way down, and then reamps it using its own very controllable clean tube amp. Speakers have a huge effect not only on the sound of our rig, but also on how loud it is. If you look at something like a Celestion Vintage 30, the spec sheet has a line that says sensitivity 100 dB. A greenback, a G12M greenback, is 98 dB. 2 dB difference is like losing around about a third of the power of your amp. A G10 greenback is a 95 dB speaker. That's like losing 2/3 of the power of your amp against a Vintage 30. Now, obviously, the speakers sound different, but just to get an idea, if you're trying to tame a loud amp and you've got a speaker option which is less sensitive, it's a built-in easy way to do it. Alternatively, if you've got a low-powered amp and you want to have more punch out of it, going for a more sensitive speaker can be like getting a significant increase in the output power of your amp. So speakers, great way to control not only your sound, but also loudness. A couple of other things that we can do. We can attenuate after the speaker, and we can do that by putting something in front of it. We've all seen those fancy plexi shields that people like Joe Bonamassa use, but if you don't have something like that, stick a teddy bear or a sheet of cardboard in front of it. It will change the sound going out into the room because you'll get an uneven frequency roll-off. But if you're miking your amp up, say you're recording or you're going out through a PA, as long as the mic is on the speaker side of the baffle, and as long as the baffle's not causing horrible phasey effects, then you're good to go, and you'll still be able to hear your amp and get some sense of the movement of air in the room from that. As long as you've got an amp that sounds basically good, if you can't quite get it to the point where it's as exciting as you would like it to be, push it with a pedal. There are lots of overdrives and boosts and distortion pedals that do everything from emulating a stack in a box through to giving a transparent push with just a little bit of grit into it. Easy to experiment with, not too expensive. Give it a go. It's a great way to just help your system along the way. Okay, we've looked at a few different ways there that we can understand and take control over the relative levels and sounds of our amps. The best route to go down is probably use whatever you've got and just do the minimum amount to get a satisfactory result, and then stop worrying about it and just enjoy your gear. Although we love our valve amps, they are not the only game in town. There are models available these days that cover all the bases, from playing out, from practicing, from recording, all in one small, easy to carry box, very cost effective, very flexible. Right, I hope that has been useful. If it has, maybe if you feel like it, give us a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. Next time out, we're going to have a look at some of the things we can do with external tech to take a little bit more control out of what we're doing with our tube amps. Until then, look after yourselves, be good. I'm Andy Picker. See you then.